I get the opportunity, pleasure to speak twice today. So I think the first talk I got 15 minutes. Annette knows me. When I go over, stop me. Okay, at the 15-minute mark for this one. And then we'll just continue on, with the next set. I think the one thing we did bring, and I'm hoping it will be useful to you today, tomorrow, maybe put it on your shelf, drag it out when you have an FMD exercise or an FMD scare in your area. But in the center of your table, there's a ready reference guide. It's like a little spiral-bound book. And I would, not so much for this talk, but the next talk, we may even turn on the lights, go through some slides and then go through some sections in that just to hit some highlights. So I guess that, in preparation for a working exercise, later this afternoon, I don't want to bore you and PowerPoint you to death, but I really want you to start, you all know a lot, your sector, your state, your industry, and, that's really what needs to be brought, to the whole understanding for preparedness in response to FMD. So at any point, if you want to ask questions or if you want to throw the BS stick at me any time, feel free to, either this talk or the next talk. So, planning is complex, and planning for complex things is even more complex. But as Pam just said, a lot of related to FMD is not rocket science. It's just making tough choices. We're doing some tough activities, both prior to an outbreak or, during an outbreak. At APHIS, we went back. We had red books that were from good red books from the 1980s, 1990s, and my former boss said, John, sorry, but you're the guy that's got to update all this stuff. And it's been a great challenge, and we really enjoyed working with stakeholders and updating, the response planning. And as part of that, we really wanted to change our goals, kind of going to a lot what Dr. Heath talked about yesterday, is that, don't get hung up on the details and the tactics. What are your goals? And obviously, who you are and where you are, your goals might be different. And your goals ahead of an outbreak maybe should be focused more on preparedness, and in a response, they'll be like getting out of a jam, getting the thing under control. So I think that, the goals that we put down on paper were to obviously detect, control, and contain FMD in animals as quickly as possible, eradicate FMD using strategies that seek to stabilize animal agriculture, the food supply, the economy, and protect public health, and provide science and risk-based approaches and systems to facilitate continuity of business for non-infected animals and non-contaminated animal products. If at any point in the response it becomes apparent that the traditional old way of just stamping out will not achieve control, containment, and eradication, alternative strategies will be immediately considered. Choosing one strategy or multiple response strategies in outbreak is a complex decision. It's not an APHIS decision. It's a state, federal, industry, tribal decision. It involves everyone. And I think the other key part of that is that the whole point of putting goals like this is that you don't lock yourself into a strategy where the response is going to be worse than the disease itself. So if you end up stamping out, like in Korea, where they basically killed a third of their pig herd, what point did the decision-making turn to, what are we doing? This thing is out of control. How can we really control the short-term, mid-term, long-term the best? Not picking on Korea, but I think that's the most recent example where a country set out with a stamping out agenda and had to modify it pretty drastically or radically from what the original plan was. All right, common operating picture. Here's the world. It's a big place. It's a small place. It's flat. It's round. In terms of FMD, this is a slide from Jeff Hammond at the World Reference Laboratory for FMD at Purebright, the current conjectured status of FMD in the world. Red is endemic, yellow is intermediate outbreaks. Basically, when you add up all the countries in the world, more countries have FMD than don't have FMD. And I think that's something we need to keep in mind. Here's the activity from 2012. Basically, they got 650 samples from 25 countries and 300 were positive. So just like Pam was saying, there's different strains of the virus. You know, there's basically 7 main types, a bunch of subtypes. Vaccination, the etiology, ecology of it can get a little bit complicated. But basically, FMD's out there. And it's really rather amazing that, you know, we haven't had it in our country for so long, or on the North American continent. I don't know if the slide's showing up. Yeah, it's showing up better there. And this is basically just showing the pools of FMD, how they exist around the world. All right, here's the common operating picture for North America. Now, you know your industry, you know your state, you know your sector, you know your corner. Your picture may be very big. You may be thinking in terms of international exports. You may be thinking in terms of just taking animals to the auction market. But basically, we are a North American system. The thing when you look at the North American system is that there is a fair bit of flow of, you know, pigs from Canada and cattle from Mexico, and they have fairly large, you know, animal inventories. But our inventories are really large. And, you know, one of the ways we're thinking about it is that, you know, we got states, you know, a state or two to the north of us and a state or two to the south of us that were engaged in, you know, it's international trading partner, but the system we have set up is really more like interstate commerce on a daily basis. Things go moving back and forth. So if one of these countries get infected or if we get infected, you know, it's very well that other countries could, you know, impose a status or a designation on us that, you know, if there's an outbreak in Mexico, what would be, you know, our status internationally? Or if there's an outbreak in our country, what would it be, you know, in Canada? And I think that epidemiologically we'd all be concerned at the start of an outbreak. Is it just one country? Is it 2? Is it 3? You know, all those trace back questions, you know, will be on everybody's mind. So I think it's good to think, you know, both locally, but also to think of the big picture for North America. Here's our bovine populations by county. This is basically just NAS data. So, you know, it's just a snapshot in time from when the last NAS data was done. The darker the area, the more concentrated, you know, the cattle population. Here's a slide trying to just show something that I think you all know, either through your direct business or intuitively, you know, how complex and how fast commerce is. Then we talk about, you know, putting something under quarantine, depending upon the premises, the location, what they're doing. If you're tracing back 2 incubation periods, 28 days, you may be putting a whole bunch of other things on your contact list or your dangerous contact list. You know, so that's a network or spider web of movements that, again, you know, depending upon the time frame that you're looking at, you know, we can get a lot of folks in a lot of different areas involved quickly. The other thing to consider is that, you know, animals move, and one of the other, you know, they're moving for breeding, exhibition, show. A big movement for livestock is the slaughter. And we have, here's basically just a visualization of the slaughter establishments by state. The states that are black, there wasn't any data for NAS. But the key point here is, if you have a regulatory intervention or a market intervention where a slaughter line goes offline or a slaughter plants go offline in its jurisdiction, what is that going to do to your, you know, your farm to fork movement of animals? So we kind of have a Rube Goldberg device, you know, for all these commodities and all these species where it's just in time, it's complicated, it's 150 to 200 trucks a day for some of these plants. And if some things begin to stop working or are shut down, it's kind of a domino effect, again, you know, from the farm to fork type chain. Here's just a visualization of the swine populations. Again, you know, things move, pigs move. We know pigs move a lot. Patrick, Dr. Webb will tell you, 600,000 on the road. Again, here's the visualization of slaughter plants. And we also have a lot of sheep in our country, lots of goats, and they move as well. The consequences of FMD, then, we have, on any given day in America, when we wake up, the state animal health officials, industry, you're all moving animals, or you're feeding animals, or you're getting prepared to move animals, or you're harvesting animals. And we immediately will have disruptions to interstate commerce. International trade will be disrupted or halted. Most countries for live animals and many products. Commodity prices will be impacted, collateral markets impacted, and then ongoing stakeholder impacts. As Pam said, you have the human terrain or the human impact on the people actually caught up in infected premises or quarantines. Beyond the economic damage, there's also social, psychological, and community damage. Challenges to anything related to, how many people here have been involved in a foreign animal disease outbreak? Depending on how big or small it was there challenges to it? Sometimes the small things are challenging. The things that should be easy are very challenging. And if you start with a blank piece of paper, how challenging is it? It gets really challenging. If you're inventing a wheel and putting it on a car, then things are pretty challenging. I think key lessons are, the first one's really key. Unified state, federal, tribal industry planning needs to respect local knowledge. If you write a plan in a cubicle at Riverdale, if you write a plan in a cubicle in a state office, that's good. But what you really need is local knowledge. The producers, the processors have to be involved in the planning. As best as you can, you need to set clearly defined and attainable goals. You need to act with speed and certainty on the things that you can act in speed and certainty. Some things may not be clear in terms of policy, but in terms of implementing biosecurity or doing trace forwards and trace backs, day one of an outbreak, what can you act, hour zero of an outbreak, what can you act with speed and certainty on? Science and risk-based approaches, communication. And as Pam spoke earlier, and I'm sure Sarah Tomlinson from the NON will say that early detection and rapid tracing, early diagnostics is also essential for the control of an outbreak to limit the size of it. So, title of this talk is, well, where does the federal stuff stop and where does the private sector start? And it's like it's all together at once all the time. And if you don't believe that, well, participate in the next outbreak because that's just how it is. Everyone's in these things together. I think one of the things we want to do is continue to raise awareness, define expectations, and improve capabilities for foreign animal diseases, preparedness, and response. And I think the big question for everyone is, what are your FMD response goals? And as you talk about response, you immediately have to talk about preparedness. How do you define being prepared? How do we define being prepared? I'm going to get the opportunity in a few minutes to go through a bunch of critical activities capabilities, but I think that before we get to that, ask yourself, for your industry, what are your goals? We showed you, what we think our goals, our overarching goals. Before you rush to the tactics and the details, is it important for you to be able to move milk? How many hours after an FMD outbreak? When you don't have any information or limited information? Is it important to you to keep it out of your state at all costs? At what point do these become competing interests? At what point does the goals of the dairy industry and the goals of the cow-calf industry, the goals of the swine industry, the goals of the taxpayer, where is there common interests and common positions to start with, and what are the outliers? I think that's something we need to get through, hopefully before an outbreak. Some of the things that we're doing at the APHIS level to promote local, regional planning, specifically related to FMD, is the secure milk supply and the secure pork supply. And these are basically getting into the questions of, what are the risks of moving a commodity like milk if you had an infected but undetected bulk tank of milk? What are the ways to land all the pigs that are on the highway at any given day at the start of an FMD outbreak? How do you start movements back up again, by state, by jurisdiction, by system? And I think that, that's the big question. And we have really good working groups with a lot of smart people, hopefully as inclusive as it needs to be, as you all want it to be, to get people to get into the technical policy and the science questions.